Today's match masterclass is all going to be about these funny looking floats to some people, but the flat float is an incredibly good way of catching bonus fish on the river. Right then, so flat floats, these wonderful floats that a lot of people are quite scared of using because they're not too sure how they work. So we're going to get into that in the video, but before we do any of that, we need to talk about the feeding, because if you get this bit wrong when you're fishing a river, then everything else that follow it is not going to be much use. So this is really important. So let's start with the ground bait mix for anyone who is interested. This is Silver X Bream, Silver X River, and worm fish meal mixed together, all in equal quantities. I've just got a bag of each, put them all together, put it through a riddle. I'm going to kick off the session feeding 3 big balls of ground bait. It's a tidal river, it flows, so we need to feed quite a bit of bait. You know, obviously there's going to be hopefully a few fish there, targeting skimmers and roach. But the main thing is you've got to feed slightly downstream of yourself, because obviously you can catch fish from downstream, you could even chase them further. But one thing you cannot do is catch fish that are upstream of you, or not very effective anyway. So as I ship out here, I'm going to feed slightly. So at the moment the river's going from my right to my left. I'm going to feed slightly to my left. Not too far, because at the moment the river's not really moving massively, but just a little bit, because then, like I said, I can always find them fish further down my peg, but I cannot find them upstream. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see people do in a river is they're putting bait far too high upstream, and that is next to useless. I'm not worried about being ridiculously accurate, because I'm quite happy to have a bit of a spread. Like I said, hopefully we're going to catch some skimmers today, and as long as they're within the area, I'm pretty happy with that. And these are about, I'm going to say, so straight out to me there, I'm going to say they're about 2 foot to my left at the moment. And you'll find out where that bait is getting to the bottom when we start to talk about the fishing in a minute. But that's that bait out. I think it's probably going to take 10 or 15 minutes for anything to settle over the top of that, I would say. So what I'll do is I'll just fish away for a moment, see if I can get the swim going, and then we will start getting into this wicked method on how to fish on the rivers. So, first little skimmer of the session. Hopefully that means that they are now going to settle over that bait and we can catch a few. Like, I don't think they're going to be massive here, but if we can have a nice day, a few roach, few skimmers, that will suit me. But before we get into the fishing, I should probably talk to you more about the floats and the rigs, because like I said, this is what this whole video is about. These are flat floats. A lot of people are slightly scared of them, and they aren't that complicated to use, although initially they look like it and appear like it. But hopefully I'm going to put people's mind at ease and prove that it's not too bad. So flat floats do, or are, exactly what it says on the tin. They're a flat float and they sit in the tide, obviously very streamlined. So the tide sort of pushes them round, so they sit very, very resistant free, meaning you can hold bait still or slow it down in the current. Very different to what a round body float. You can imagine there's a lot of tide in a round body float, pushing it all the while. So you almost have to let that run through the river. But with these, you can definitely hold them still or slow them down. That will become more apparent when we get into the fishing. So if you don't understand what I mean by hold it still or run it down, then that will hopefully become apparent soon. But elastic choice, we've just got a single 5. It's nice and light. Like I said, there's nothing, well, hopefully there's something massive, but it's not expected. I've got an 014 mainline. Currently, at the moment, I'm using a 3 gram flat float. Now, the river that I'm fishing today, with the depth and the pace of the flow, 3 grams is going to be right for most of the time. If I was really going for it in a match, I'd probably have a 2 gram and a 4 gram set up as well. if your river's deeper, faster flowing, stuff like that, they do them bigger, and again, they do them smaller. They go right up to like 40, 50 gram on the continent. It's a really good way of fishing, no matter sort of what the river throws at you. So you're gonna have to pick the right float to your situation. But again, when we start fishing, that'll become much more apparent in how you do that. Halfway down my rig, I have a very, very small swivel. Two jobs for this. First of all, these floats can spin your hook links up a little bit. So that stops that happening when you're striking through the float that spins. That stops all the twist. And secondly, you can either change the top or the bottom section. So if you were to damage it on a reed stem or something like that, one section's got a bit of wear and tear, you haven't got to make a whole new rig up again. And that's especially easy for the bottom section because the shotting patterns, once you've got them right, it's quite nice and easy. You can keep that, tie a new top section on, and away you go. But I've got a 2 gram Olivet, which is bulk shotted about 2 foot away from my hook. And then below that, I've got 2 more number 8s, and then again 2 more number 8s. So I've got about 2 foot for the bulk, 6 inches below that 2 more, 8 inches below that 2 more, and then we've got about 8 inches to the hook, which is a hook link of 0.12 and a size 16 hook. Again, if you're fishing for different fish, people catch barbel and stuff like this, you definitely have to up your tackle, but this is a very sort of standard way of fishing it. I don't want to complicate it. I'm going to try and make it sound as simple as it can. So fish all of your shot in a bulk with a couple of droppers, and what you're trying to create is a nice curve. So you can imagine my bulk would be sitting here, and then hopefully in the tide these are going to curl down and it's going to sit nicely. So that's the reason why we set it up like this, and hopefully that's quite simple. I haven't gone into too much detail in confusing people. Now, if you want to use or have a go on the flat flow, everything I'm using today, from the rigs, the terminal tackle, all the items, I'll put a list together and I'll put a link in the description. So it'll be one easy place. You can find out exactly what you need, and then you can have a go yourself. But what I want to do is just prove that that skimmer wasn't fluke. I'm going to have another little bit of fishing, try and catch another one. Then we will get into the session, because that's when you're going to really sort of understand how good the flat boat can be and how you can fish it. Because like I said, it is slightly different to anything that people perhaps have fished before if you've not already used a flat float. So it's going to be a lot of information coming up. Stay tuned for that. Get ready for an information dump. But let's see if we can just catch another one first. If we can, then it should be a good day. That was a little flurry of roach. So what I'm going to do is see if I can fish away and catch a skimmer while I'm talking to you, explaining the flat float. But first thing I'm going to do is just put another ball of ground bait in there, plenty of chopworm, plenty of caster, the usual sort of suspects into what you would expect if you're trying to catch skimmers. It may just be that, I mean, looking at the water, it's not a great deal of colour in there, so possibly it's a bit more of a roach day. But you know, we caught that skimmer, and as a rule of thumb, they don't really live alone. So I'm not having it. I'm saying that we can do something to make a difference, and let's see if we can do it while I'm talking to you. So same process. I've already talked through cupping in, but I'm slightly downstream myself, cupping it into a far-back mouth so I know where it is, and that goes in. So hopefully there's a chance that that's going to make a difference. And the other thing I want to do is I want to just double check the depth that I'm fishing at. Because we're on a tidal river, it definitely needs to be checked about every 20 minutes, half an hour. I would be checking your depth, because the water levels obviously rise and fall, and this would be a good opportunity for me to show you how you plumb up. So with this, because you want to lay a bit of line on the bottom, you want about a float length, maybe a float and a half over depth. So you can see there, I'm a little bit too much over depth, because we're on the ebb tide now. Ebb tide, for anyone who's unsure, means it is just going out slowly. So it's going to get shallower and shallower, meaning that you do need to keep checking your depth, because if not, you're going to find yourself either fishing over depth, or if the tide was in reverse, you're going to get the same and you're going to be fishing under depth. That's even worse. So over depth's not too bad on this rig. Right, there we go. So we've got a whole float and a bit. I think we're back out to where I would like to be fishing. So that's 2 things done. Now, bait wise, experimenting with different options, I'm going to go for a little bunch of fluoros. That's probably my favourite skimmer bait on this river, but we've obviously got maggots, we've got worms. I don't think there's enough fish in there yet to go really positive with like a big dendrobina, but maggots, casters, worms, them sort of baits, flick between the 2 and try and find out how or what you think is best. Now, where we're fishing, so we know where we cut that ball of ground bait in, but obviously we know the tide is going to be washing it down slightly. So to find out where your ground bait is actually hitting the bottom is actually quite simple. So like I said, these flat floats, you can either hold them still or you can just keep in contact with them. So as the tide picks up on my float, the line from my float to my pole is then straight, and as long as I keep slowly going downstream, bam, there we got a bite. Oh, we could have got a skimmer as well. But what I was trying to demonstrate is I'll try and do it when and if we get this fishing. What you can do is slowly run your bait down river, and then where you're getting bites pretty much is where your ground bait's landing. So obviously there's no sort of hard and fast rule. I can't say to you fish 5 foot below your ground bait, because that's not necessarily the case. If your river's twice as deep, as if it's twice as quick, it might be further downstream. But that was where I was saying about why it's so important when you are fishing to make sure you're definitely feeding downstream, because you can always go further down, but you can't come further up. This one really wanted that. There we go. Let's have a little look at it. There you go. That's what we're trying to catch. There's a lot of these in here. Definitely that sort of size and a little bit bigger. But I don't know what made us catch that fish. Was it the little bunch of fluoros? Was it the depth change? Was it a ball of ground bait? You don't know. That's the beauty about fishing. You never quite know, do you? But let's try and repeat that again. So what I've now mentally done in my head is I know where I got that bite, which probably means, just dry some of this slime off. Slimy old things, skimmers, aren't they? What that normally means is that's where your ground bait has hit the bottom. So rather than running your rig through your peg, what the flat float allows you to do is hold it dead still over that area. So when I was starting the session, and I'll do it on this run as well, because let's pretend that we didn't get that fish just then, and you're still trying to work out where your bait is. So you'd lower your rig in just below where you're feeding, because you know it's downstream somewhere. We let it all tighten up. The tide picks the float up. It straightens the line between my pole tip and my float. And what I'm doing is I hold my pole tip just level with the water, and I can just slowly let that float go down. Now I had that skimmer bite about here-ish. So I'd expect, if I was going to get a bite, to be around there. Some boats going on, a lot of people using the river. So all I'm doing is slowly staying in contact, and I'm just letting it go down really, really slowly. Now obviously with a standard round bodied float, you wouldn't be able to do this as much, because if you're trying to hold your float back, your tide would be washing your bait up. It wouldn't really be working. So no bite on that go. So what I'm going to do is, I think I know where my bait hit is, because that's where we just call that skimmer. So you lower your bait in, and now you can hold it dead still. So if everything's correct, and I'll explain how you know it's correct in a little bit, you can hold your poles tip here, and I think now that bait is fishing right over where my ground bait is. Just because that's where I caught that skimmer, it kind of gives it away where they're sitting. And there we go, there's another bite. So that's what I mean, you kind of work out where your bait is, and then you haven't got to keep running down the river like you would of a standard pole rig or anything like that. You can just hold it still over the top of where you're fishing. There we go, a nice roach on that one. Bunch of skimmers, let's pop in, bunch of pinkies. Let's go out there with a single maggot this time. It's worth changing, trying different things, because you just generally don't know what bait's going to be best. And sometimes you can go out there and you can catch one on something else, and then you can change and you get another one. Like, generally you have to keep moving. So I think our fish are there, which in my line of sight, it's going to be harder for you to see on camera, but those 2 bites have come about 3 foot below where I cupped my bait in. So actually where my tip is just touching the water, that's where I cupped my bait in. I've got about 2.5 to 3 foot of line to my float, and where I'm holding it still is roughly there. And like I said, if your rig is working well, you can hold your float still, and it sits like you can see now. Ooh, just missed a bite. It sits with the bristle sitting straight upright. Now in a minute, hopefully I can catch another one, and then I'm going to get really, not really technical. I don't want to, biting the way down. I don't want to put anyone off, but a little bit more technical, because what you can do is what I said earlier. Sometimes you need different weights of flat floats. So if it wasn't sitting perfectly now, if my flat float was too light, the bristle would be facing my pole tip because it's washing all of my olivette up in the air. Vice versa of that. If my float bristle was sitting like the flow was pushing the float over, it'd be sitting wrong again, and you'd know you'd need to use a heavier float. So let me try and see if I can catch one. I'm just going to inch a little bit further down from where I had, and there's another bite. So that one was just about 6 inches below. So again, that's what you can't do on a feeder, is you can't sort of move it. Once a feeder's in, unless you reel in and cast it, you can't inch it down your peg, which you can do with thing. I mean, it's a little roach. It's not really, it's not really a winner in the sun for trying to catch any silvers. But let me try and show you what I mean about that pole float. Now, this is going to be as best as I can explain it. If I get this confused, you get confused, please drop me a message, because obviously you've got to remember there's very different level of experience. You might have fished a flat boat before, you might know this, but a lot of people watching never have. So if I sort of say something you don't understand, please drop me a message and I'll try to answer it. So if you've got the perfect gram flat float, this is my pole tip, my finger, and you've got some line going to here. If it's perfect, your float will sit upright when you're holding it still in the current, because what's happening is all your bait's in a line, you're just fishing over depth and it's sitting perfectly. Okay, if your pole float does this, so the bristle is pointing towards the pole float, can you imagine what's happening there is it's lifting all of your shot up, which means your float's riding up in the water, so it tends to sit like that. That means your float is too light, and you either need to put a heavier float on for it to do that, or let's go in reverse. If your float is too heavy, it will sit like this. So again, my pole tip is here. The float is lighter than the shot, and all of your weight is dragging behind your float now. The current's trying to push your float over, and that's why it's sitting like that. So if you've got loads of rigs, you can mix and match, and as the current picks up and your different river, you can use whatever gram pole float you want to make the bristle sit upright. Okay, hopefully I made that make sense. It is a little bit technical, but if you can get this round in your head, you can fish a flat float and you can catch loads of fish, okay? So you want it to sit perfectly like that, but there is a cheat method if you're fishing here in the UK. If you're watching this in other countries, sometimes you're not allowed to overshot your float. But a 3 gram float will do most of my stuff today, because it's very clever how it works. Here in the UK, you're allowed to overshot. So if for some reason the current has picked up and my float's riding like this, so what that would normally mean, like we just said, line from here, my float's too light. You know, it's picking my bolt shot up, my float's getting left behind and it's sitting like this. What you can do is add a couple more number 8s just to overshot it, and that will bring the bristle back round to sit straight up. So if you are struggling with your float, looking like it's too light and you haven't got extra rigs and stuff like that, a couple more shot on, overshot it, and it will just sit up perfectly. Okay, so that's a little cheat way. Like I said, internationally, they're not allowed to do it. If you went on a world champs and stuff like that, then, I mean, don't get me wrong, if you're watching this and you're in a world champs, you probably know how to fish the flat float, but that is true. Like when you're fishing in some of these events, you're not allowed to. But here in the UK, like I said, you can get away with a little bit of a cheat method, is you can just overshot your rig to make sure that works. So that, what I've just explained in a fishing situation, let's try and show you. So I think I fish her about here. I can hold my tip dead still, and if you look at my bristle, it is pretty much upright. Maybe needs, you know, it's pointing slightly towards my pole tip, which might mean I need to put a little number 9 or a number 8 shot, but I mean, it's not too bad. It's within a degree or two of being perfect. So I'm pretty happy with that. Oh, and we had another bite. So long as we're getting bites, I'm pretty happy. But yeah, like I said, I hope I made that make sense. It sounds quite complicated. It's really not. Long as you have got the right weight float on, or you're overshotting it so your bristle is sitting upright, you're fishing slightly over depth, like I said. Sometimes if you're fishing there's no fish. If you're fishing a really strong river, like the Trent or something like that for barbel, I might overlay, I don't know, maybe you could put 2 foot over. It really doesn't matter when you're doing it. Like, you're better to have more line on the bottom when you're fishing this method than you are if you're fishing off the bottom. This isn't the one. You know, if you were fishing off the bottom and the fish are wanting bait, run past them all the time, you'd fish a normal round body float and you're probably going to be catching a lot better like that. But as I just said, that bristle was sitting slightly wrong. So let's just see. This might be able to show you. If I just nip this on, now when I hold it out there, excuse this going in my teeth, just the quickest way to do it. But now that's one, I've just added a number 9 shot on there basically. Hopefully what we're going to see now is what you mean about that bristle sitting a bit straighter because it's slightly overshot. And as the current slows down, I might have to take some of that shot off. If the current speeds up, I might have to add some more on. But it's definitely a way of using one rig to do everything. So that, you see that bristle now is sitting slightly better in the way it's sitting more straight. But if I was to let it go too quick, watch what happens here. The float goes underwater, so now I know it's overshotted. Hopefully Amanda can pick that up on the camera. If I let that go, the float is too heavy, the shot's too heavy and the float goes under. So that's how you know if you're overshotted and it's working nicely. Right, so let's reposition. Let's try and catch one more while I'm talking to you, because like I said, I know I have just put a lot of information to you there, and hopefully I've made it make sense. You can, if you want, fish a bump bar with this, because you could hold it dead still then. But what that doesn't allow you to do, like I said, I'm fishing here, perhaps I don't get a bite for 20 seconds, I want to inch it down 6 inches, I can just let it go and then hold again, and it's now fishing like 6 inches further down my peg. What I find if you're fishing a bump bar is you don't really get that option because it's a bit more rigid and you tend to have it in one place. Don't get me wrong, there we go, if you find out exactly where you're fishing, bump bar's great because you put it in there, it doesn't move, everything's nice and straight and it's perfect. But there is another roach. So I mean, that's pretty much how you fish the flat float. Like I said, I really do hope that I made sense for you. I'm sure there's more skimmers to be had. It's just finding out a way of catching them. So what I might do now is I might fish on, see if I can do that. I'll perhaps even go to a big worm bait or something like that, but definitely having a couple of fish like we just have there. We've now caught a couple of skimmers, and I definitely bumped one a bit earlier as well. So although I said there's not too much colour in the river, they are catchable. It's just finding a way of getting through to those rather than quite a lot of those roach that you've seen me catch. No, The streak is broken. I just had about 6 or 7 skimmers in a row, and that one is going to be a roach. But I think me and Amanda have just made an executive decision, because over there we can see it's not looking too good. It's actually raining, so it's been a lovely day. I haven't actually put a net in, so apologies for anyone who likes the catch shots, but this is the second day the rivers have been open. These fish are going to be caught an awful lot over the next few months, so I thought that I'd give them as little disturbance as I can, but that's definitely going to be it for me until we get wet. I don't want to ruin a great few hours fishing by packing up in the rain. So I hope that you've enjoyed it. Like I said, it's a really good way of fishing. Definitely selecting a bonus fish. I really wanted to try and finish on a skimmer because we just had a real good run of them, but the fishing was great. It's definitely going to get better and better. Hopefully, as more bait goes in here, more fish are going to come. So I hope that you get out using a flat bait yourselves. If I didn't explain anything correctly, please let me know and I'll try and answer it in the comments, because like I said, it does sound complicated, but hopefully I broke it down and made it a bit easier. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll be back very soon with another Match Masterclass. But until then, we'll see you next time.